Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Laura Prada from our Telesur studios in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin with our news, checking out our headlines. In Venezuela, government is confident legislative elections will help ease political and ideological differences, while COVID-19 numbers of imported cases continue to grow. European Union hopes to reopen its borders on July, but will review individuals' nations' COVID-19 situations. UN Secretary General says Israel plans to annex the occupied West Bank is a serious violation of international law. We begin with our news. You stay with us. The President of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, stated that the upcoming legislative elections will help ease political and ideological differences in the country.
El nuevo Consejo Nacional Electoral.
The new National Electoral Court is now active, and there will be a call for parliamentary elections. Venezuela has to resolve its political and ideological differences. We must reconcile differences through a single path, the electoral path, the path of democracy, the path of democratic debate.
The president also stated that if there ever was a referendum to revoke his government, it would have to be a democratic decision made only by the Venezuelan people.
In Venezuela, those who decide, those who elect, and those who revoke are the sovereign people of Venezuela, through their vote. No one else, not Donald Trump, not Joe Biden, not a group of cop plotters.
Meanwhile, Venezuela's Vice President Delcy Rodriguez updated the COVID-19 situation in the country.
In the last 24 hours, we have discovered 24 new cases of COVID-19 via community infection across the Bolivarian nation.
The Vice President also reported on the number of COVID-19 new imported cases.
131 cases came from Colombia, of migrants who were already infected over there. 3 from Ecuador and 7 from Peru. In total, we have 141 imported cases.
In the Caribbean, CARICOM Chair and Barbados Prime Minister Mia Mottley has expressed concern over the political crisis in Guyana. She further criticized the report by the Chief Elections Officer at Guyana's Election Commission, who found the ruling party to be the winner of the March 2nd polls, despite the recount showing the opposition as the victor.
The CARICOM Observer Team was of the unshakable belief that the people of Guyana expressed their will at the ballot box on March 2nd, and that the results of the recount, certified as valid by the staff of the Guyana Elections Commission, led to an orderly conclusion on which the declaration of the results of the election could and would be made. Therefore, we must ask, on what grounds and by what form of executive fiat does the Chief Elections Officer determine that he should invalidate one vote, far less over 115,000 votes, when the votes were already certified as valid by the officers of the Guyana Elections Commission in the presence of the said political parties?
The Caribbean Court of Justice says no later than this Wednesday it would issue an order to continue the hold first implemented by Guyana's Court of Appeal, preventing the declaration of the election results until it hears the matter on July 1st. This comes after the Chief Elections Officer submitted his report to the chairperson of the Elections Commission on Tuesday, showing the ruling, a partnership for national unity, had won the March 2nd polls. The evening, the opposition People's Progressive Party, Civic, served a notice of the appeal court's ruling to the CCJ. The court had decreed that the words "more votes cast" be interpreted to mean more valid votes cast, and that the victor not be announced for 3 more days. Meanwhile, Peruvian President Martín Vizcarra has announced that if the government and private clinics do not reach an agreement for the use of intensive care units, he will activate a constitutional law that allows governmental intervention on private property.
We are going to wait 48 hours for both sides to reach an agreement, and we hope this will be possible. If not, considering health and human life and taking into account the first article of the Constitution, we will apply Article number 70 of our Constitution.
As of Wednesday, Cuba has reported 2,319 novel coronavirus cases, of which 2,130 people have recovered, while the death toll stands at 85. Our correspondent in Havana, Nayara Tardo, has the story for us.
These images were taken on April 1st by a team of specialists of the Tropical Medicine Institute Pedro Curie. Martha became the 9th patient to recover from COVID-19 in Cuba. After nearly 2 months of overcoming the disease and respecting all the security measures, we went to hear the story of the grandmother that beat the virus that is devastating the world.
¿Cómo se siente Marta a los 95 años después de haber vencido el coronavirus?
Bueno, me siento muy bien. A mí no me ha dejado secuelas.
I feel very well. I do not have any after effects. I feel a bit tired sometimes, but I feel well. I walk with a bit of help. I have a walker to move around the house.
Martha was one of the first COVID-19 cases in the island. Her daughter Clotilde, dancer and choreographer of the renowned dance company Acosta Danza, arrived from Spain the first days of March, yet she could not imagine what would come next. Clotilde was hospitalized together with her mother, but she affirms that seeing the favorable development of her mother made those days in the health institute easier.
Knowing what she slowly but surely overcome, how strong she was, that my mother did not have any serious problems, how well she was cared for. The most important thing for her is knowing two things, that Cuba is a special country, unique, and statistics proves it.
Martha could not avoid showing us her passion for football, for Barcelona and Messi. She affirmed that at these stages of her life, beating COVID-19 has been her greatest goal.
Siempre he sido fanática de la mayoría de los deportes.
I have always been a fan of most sports, even wrestling and boxing. But when I started to watch football, luckily I started to watch it with Barcelona's match. That's when I became a fan of football and Messi.
As Cuba shows positive results in the control of the novel coronavirus, this family from Havana appreciates the work of the island's health system, while insisting that the best way to control the spread of the disease is individual and collective discipline.
I believe that the only thing that we can do is take care of ourselves. And thank God we are the best country to do it. We have all the necessary conditions, and my mother is an example of it. There's no way to repay what has been done. I lived firsthand. I lived in the hospital, I lived with the doctors, with the health staff, super committed, super loving and super attentive, and super professional, well prepared. It is amazing.
Today, Marta is part of the more than 2,100 recovered COVID-19 patients in Cuba. As she shows me the beautiful view from her balcony in Havana's neighborhood of Vedado, she confesses that watching the sea every afternoon makes her forget the intense days when she had to fight against COVID-19. Nayara Tardo, Telesur, La Habana.
With this wonderful story from recoveries from COVID-19, we come to a first break. Remember, follow us on Twitter at Telesur English and on my account at Laura P. Telesur. We'll be right back. We are back with our news. The European Union hopes to reopen its borders in July, but will review individual nations' COVID-19 situation every 2 weeks. The 27-nation bloc is eager to restart the tourism industry, which has taken a massive hit during the pandemic, but fears of new outbreaks have so far only allowed for partial reopening of borders. Nations would also be assessed for their records on testing, contact tracing, and treatment reliability of data and reciprocal travel arrangements for European Union residents. In Italy, 28 refugees who were rescued at sea have tested positive for the coronavirus. The test results represent the largest cluster yet among newly arrived migrants after a handful of positive cases were recorded in recent days in Greece. The migrants were being held on the ship Moby Sasa off the coast of Sicily, where some would-be asylum seekers are taken to undergo quarantine after being rescued at sea.
I'm personally worried about this situation. We should think about this community that woke up with this news. Unfortunately, we have workers and authorities and a good prefect who are working to handle in every place and every aspect a situation in which you have 28 people COVID positive on this ship. I'd like to clarify, as far as tourism is concerned, that Sicily continues to be COVID-free. This is news because, fortunately, these people are located on a ship in quarantine.
In France, the Louvre Museum in Paris is set to reopen on July 6 after being shut down due to COVID-19. For nearly 4 months, France is to further ease restrictions imposed to fight the virus from Tuesday, but it will only be open in July that many top museums and attractions reopen. Culture Minister Frank Riester confirmed Friday that wearing a mask would be obligatory for visiting a museum in France, while some will have to impose prior reservation systems to avoid a heavier influx of visitors.
We have 75% of the foreign visitors. Indeed, after the French, the most important visitors are the United States and China, followed by Brazilians and Koreans. So if the borders remain closed, these visitors are not there. So we are expecting a drop in attendance of about 80%. Of course, this has financial consequences. Today we can roughly measure the losses since the closure at a little over 40 million euros. It is difficult to know if it will get worse in the coming months, probably.
In Ukraine, 3 people have died and hundreds have fled their homes in the western part of the country following the worst flooding in a decade. Floods caused by heavy rains that began this week hit 200 villages, damaging 5,000 homes and forcing the evacuation of 800 people. The Interior Ministry said around 70% of monthly rainfall in some regions fell over several days. Some experts blame large-scale and often illegal logging operations in the Carpathian Mountains for removing trees that would normally help contain the runoff. And Kosovo's President Hashim Thaçi has been indicted on charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity for his role in the country's 1990s conflict. The prosecutor said that Thaçi and 9 others are criminals responsible for nearly 100 murders, torture, and enforced disappearances. The accusations covering Kosovo's independence war against Serbia in 1998-1999 have to be confirmed by a judge at the Kosovo Specialist Chamber before formal charges are announced. The war cost more than 10,000 lives and only ended after a NATO air campaign. Kosovo declared its independence in 2008, something Serbia still does not recognize. And the governors of New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut on Wednesday ordered travelers from 8 U.S. states to quarantine for 14 days on arrival. New Jersey's Governor Phil Murphy said the tough new quarantine mandate was the smart thing to do after the United States recorded its second greatest increase in COVID-19 cases since early March. New York City has the early epicenter of the U.S. coronavirus pandemic, with more than 31,000 people have died of COVID-19 in New York State, roughly 1/4 of U.S. total. A White House spokesman, Judd Deere, said that he did not believe the quarantine applied to President Donald Trump, who just returned from a visit to Arizona and was scheduled to be in New Jersey this weekend. And the number of people hospitalized in California with COVID-19 has increased by almost a third in the last 2 weeks, with about 1,500 suspicious or confirmed patients requiring intensive care.
You'll see from this chart, just in the last few days, those numbers have increased some 69%. to 7,149 individuals, over 7,000 individuals, a record number here in the state of California that have tested positive for COVID-19.
Time for another break. Remember, find this and more news on our website, closerenglish.net. We'll be right back. During a virtual meeting of the UN Security Council, Secretary General Antonio Guterres repeated a call to Israel to stop its plans to annex the occupied West Bank. Guterres called Israel's upcoming decision a watershed moment that will constitute a most serious violation of international law. Guterres' call was echoed by other leaders and foreign ministers addressing, warning that Israel's unilateral action could trigger a major escalation of violence in the region. Palestinian Foreign Affairs Minister Riyad al-Maliki warned any annexation would be a crime and lead to immediate and tangible repercussion.
Annexation, whether partial or total, gradual or immediate, is the ultimate breach of the UN Charter and cannot go unchallenged. From a legal perspective, annexation is not only unlawful, it is a crime under the Rome Statute. From a political perspective, it will ruin the chances for Israeli, Palestinian, and regional peace. From a security perspective, it is utter nonsense as it replaces internationally recognized borders that can be defended with a system of military control and subjugation that only fuels conflict and violence.
Iranian President Hassan Rouhani stressed on Wednesday that his nation is willing to resume talks with the United States as soon as the U.S. government returned to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, also known as the Iran nuclear deal. President Rouhani also called for the U.S. to apologize to Iran, to the Iranian people, and noted that the new talks would be subjected to a U.S. commitment to UN regulations and the reparation of damages. The statement came after United States officials urged Iran to resume diplomatic talks before the 2020 presidential elections in the United States. Iraqi President Barham Salih has called for negotiations to settle disputes between the Kurdistan regional government and the Iraqi federal government. President Salih made the statements during a meeting with representatives of the Kurdistan regional government at the presidential palace in Baghdad. Current discussions focus on the regional government's financial stake of federal budgets, oil sports, disputed territorial areas, and the fight against ISIS, the Islamic State terrorist group. President Salih noted that solutions can be reached to guarantee the national interest. The day before the visit, Kurdistan Regional Prime Minister Mansour Barzani said his government is ready to conclude a comprehensive agreement with Baghdad that guarantees the financial entitlements owed to the region based on the constitution. Authorities in Afghanistan says that an escalation in Taliban violence has complicated the start of peace negotiations with insurgents. The chairman of the High Council for National Reconciliation, Abdullah added that the political environment is now very difficult. Peace talks were expected to be held this month due to an de-escalation of Taliban attacks following the celebration of Eid al-Fitr, but these have been delayed after new attacks which resulted in the death of 291 Afghan security forces. An Algerian criminal court has sentenced a former prime minister and energy minister to prison on corruption charges. Former Prime Minister Ahmed Oujaya was sentenced to 12 years, while former Energy Minister Youssef Yousf was sentenced to 3 years in prison. The verdict was the second against Oujaya, who had already been sentenced to 15 years in another corruption case in December. The court also handed down a 20-year prison term to Oujaya's former industry and mining minister Abdeslam Bouchouareb, while businessman Mourab Oulmi received a 10-year sentence. All the charges were connected to corruption, money laundering, and abuse of power. And Lebanese health authorities offer an update on COVID-19 figures this Wednesday, reporting 22 new cases. 15 of the new coronavirus cases were locally transmitted and 7 were imported. Health authorities also noted that over 1,700 PCR tests have been carried out in the last 24 hours and over 1,000 patients have recovered from the virus. The total number of confirmed cases in Lebanon stands at over 1,600, while the death toll is 33. And health authorities in Kenya reported new COVID-19 cases on Wednesday, while noting that the novel coronavirus is now present in 40 counties of the country.
The positive cases that we are now reporting, as you all know, are a result of community transmission. And we are aware now that the disease is firmly within our urban and rural settings. And as of yesterday, 40 out of 47 counties had reported cases of COVID-19, which amounts to about 85% of counties in the country. Nairobi is leading with 2,428 cases, followed with Mombasa with 1,304 cases, followed by Busia and Kajiado, which have had many cases in terms of cross-border truck drivers.
Police in the Democratic Republic of the Congo fired tear gas and water cannons to repel hundreds of protesters who rallied against a proposed new law on Wednesday. Opponents say the reform, which would place prosecutors under the government's authority rather than the courts, undermines the independence of the judiciary branch. On the second day of protests, crowds face off with security forces on the streets around Parliament before being pushed back by armed officers in jeeps. South Africa plans to roll out the continent's first coronavirus vaccine trial this week. The vaccine candidate developed by Oxford Jenner Institute in the United Kingdom, where it's already being evaluated. There are 4,000 participants have signed up for the trial. In South Africa, the University of Witwatersrand is collaborating with the University of Oxford and the Oxford Jenner Institute in the trial of the vaccine known as SHADOX1 and COV-19. The pilot will involve 2,000 people, including 50 who are HIV positive.
That these 8 participants form part of what is known as Group 1, which is a group where it's a small group of 50 individuals where we're trying to understand 2 important issues. The first issue is the safety of the vaccine, especially in terms of what would be common side effects, and the second issue is how well the body mounts an immune response against the vaccine. Once there's about 60% of the population that have developed immunity, we expect that effective reproductive rate to drop to under 1. It doesn't mean the virus is going to go away. But once there's 60% of the population, especially the adult population, that becomes immune, we expect that effective reproductive rate to go to under 1, which basically means the virus will still be around, it will still circulate, but its chain of transmission has been interrupted, which is important.
As we come to the end, we have an invitation. Telesur English is now reaching more areas across the Caribbean. You can find us on the following channel under the following settings. Like this, we keep bringing closer our global thoughts. Until next time, thank you for watching.